Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this open session of Committee of the Whole. We are going to hear from our Development Services, Planning and Development Services Manager, Dwight Colburn. Mr. Colburn, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Your Worship, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you a draft of the proposed excessive noise and nuisance bylaw, which has been included in your packages. This is a draft. So at this stage, staff is, the objective here is to present to council sort of an overview of their goals and intents with some discussion around some of the changes, and then providing you with an opportunity to take away homework. Homework's always good. Come back with any further discussion or things that you would like staff to take further investigation into or consideration, and then we would move forward from there. So at this stage, this is not sort of an adoption of the bylaw or moving towards that at this particular meeting. It's sort of the first presentation and then launch into moving towards that. First, I'd like to just offer and say thanks to my team, especially to Jennifer Jervis and the town solicitor in their efforts of putting this draft together. We've worked together to bring a document to council that we feel is very close to where we want to go. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, and I will also put a sort of a caveat in there that with any bylaw, any regulation, it's all great, black and white on paper, but it really gets tested when the rubber hits the road. So we move forward, obviously, under that perspective. So to get started, the current noise bylaw, so the goal was to sort of modernize the bylaw. The current bylaw that we have, noise bylaw number 23, was adopted just after amalgamation in 1998. So it's been about 25 years. With one amendment that was coming in 2015. So we're looking at trying to modernize the bylaw, bring it into some current language, implement some additional measures into the bylaw. That's what we're presenting is an excessive noise and nuisance bylaw. So we're adding in some other elements into this in terms of public nuisance as well as public disturbance, which is not sort of in isolation. There are other jurisdictions, municipalities, that's how their approach has been. It's because a lot of times when you get into noise issues, there's also sort of a nuisance perspective or nuisance elements that plays into that as well. So in this particular new bylaw, so this bylaw, when it's adopted, we'll repealing the existing bylaw and introducing this new one. So it's not an amendment, it's a complete repeal of the existing and adoption of a new bylaw. So we've looked at expanding the definitions for clarity. So we're adding 10 new definitions, which is in section 3. We've expanding bylaws to, as I mentioned, to include public nuisance and public disturbance, sections 2, 7, and 8, as well as provide an avenue for exemptions to the bylaw. So in our current bylaw, there are exemptions, but we're looking at sort of the process of how we want to move forward with that, as well as looking at, are there some additional measures or sort of some additional exemptions that we want to consider, or sort of refining some of the ones that currently exist. And we want an introduction. We're going to introduce an administrative penalty as well as a nuisance abatement fee in this particular one. Administrative penalties is a structure that's provided for in the Local Governance Act, which allows municipalities in terms of their bylaws to be able to administer penalties to address offenses. Again, it's a voluntary type payment, and if the offender decides not to pay voluntarily, then obviously there are other measures that can be taken. So in terms of Q11, or our reporting services, we've recorded about 15 noise-related concerns in 2024. 8 of those 8 were from the same address or concern. In the past 4 years, staff have had 3 complaints regarding sawmill use in residential neighborhoods. So that's sort of something that we've taken consideration as we go through this bylaw review and update process. And we've also received complaints regarding excess noise and disturbances, vibrations, types things from the music itself, and impacts on residential properties, so in terms of churches and businesses. So just some of the nature of the complaints that we get. Current noise bylaw provides special exemptions in relation to organized and scheduled traditional, festive, and religious activities. This in the current bylaw is basically carte blanche. It doesn't have any perspectives around whether that activity is inside the main building or outside the main building. If it's associated with any of these types of activities, organized or scheduled traditional, festive, religious events, it's a carte blanche. So you can't, it becomes very difficult in some situations to and actually enforce the noise bylaw. So by introducing some of the exemptions, it will allow us to say, okay, yep, in the current bylaw, there's a carte blanche, but what about if we have it so that if some of the activities happen outside or they're a little excessive beyond what we would normally reasonably expect, there's an opportunity for those types of festive events or activities to come to council, or, as we'll see in a moment, a committee of council, if council decides to move that way, to ask for an exemption for a specific period of time, which would actually involve notifying the residents in the area to give them a sense of when this is happening and then to plan accordingly. So through that, we've introduced in the draft a subcommittee of council to review and approve exemption request, which I'll talk about. So in terms of the subcommittee of council, what that is if there's an exemption request, then right now under the current bylaw, it does say that there's certain festivals, parades, street dances, those types of things that have to be approved by council. So it actually is there. There should be a request to council when these things happen. So what we're saying is that if we're going to extend that to include, maybe church activities or other organized activities, the bylaw is saying, does council wish to strike a subcommittee? So the subcommittee can actually receive those requests through a formal process. There would actually be required to notify the residents within 250 meters, I believe, and get feedback, and all that would come into the committee who would make an approval based on recommendations. The other option is to say, okay, no, we'd rather for that to come to council and council to deal with them on a case-by-case basis. So that's something that sort of we're presenting as an option, and it's something that we would ask council to consider and provide feedback to staff, whether we would continue at a full whole committee of council, or if we would sort of do a subcommittee. Now that, again, that's based on the number of asks that we would receive. It's not a big tremendous. It's not something that we get, hundreds of in a year, even dozens in a year. So again, that's sort of the balance that council would consider. How much does this take away from our normal activities and duties and responsibility as council? Is that something that we'd rather see move towards a subcommittee? In some jurisdictions, they do have subcommittees just for the fact of they are larger municipalities and they have more of these requests. So some of the special exemptions from the proposed bylaw include emergency vehicles, obviously, activities associated with the restoration of property or regular maintenance and upkeep of property, anything that deals with municipal services, so snow plowing, capital projects, those types of things. The detonation of fireworks remains unchanged from the current bylaw. We recognize there are other activities afoot as it relates to detonation of fireworks, so that remains unchanged from the current bylaw. Sports activities on authorized fields, which is a reflective of the current bylaw. Organized and scheduled activities through exemption process, I've already mentioned. Construction, noise, reasonable property maintenance. We've also introduced drones. We have received actually some complaints regarding drones. So we have introduced that as well because on two perspectives. One is the noise they make, but also has a nuisance. Because in some particular case, if the activity or use of drones is interfering with somebody's enjoyment and regular use of their property, then it becomes a public nuisance side of things. So that's brought in there as well, with the exemption, of course, of if it is related to emergency activities, if there's an emergency event and you need to use it, okay, well, you don't have to come and ask if you can use it, as well as commercial or institutional uses. So, for example, if the town during Spring Festival, we had to put up a drone to monitor and do a surveillance of an area, obviously that would be a reasonable use for that particular situation. As well as farming equipment and sawmill or wood harvesting operations when it is associated with a bona fide forestry operation. So if you have an actual sawmill or harvesting industry or business, that is bona fide, which is mean for the purpose of income, making money, versus just a regular real run or real use of sawmill. So what we've done in this particular bylaw is we've also, as I said, introduced a public nuisance. So we can get complaints regarding noise or use. And again, we try to work with property owners to address the situation, get a sense of what's happening on the property, what they're doing. So it's sort of an educational approach. Once you get beyond that, if there isn't compliance, then you start moving to enforcement. By having the ability to also declare those things as being a public nuisance, it gives you yet another tool in the toolbox, because there's one thing for it to be noise, but then when it moves into you are aware of the issue as a property owner or the person that's generating the noise, now you've moved into the point where you are becoming a nuisance. And it's actually having a great impact on the neighborhood and the neighboring properties. So that, coupled with the new administrative penalties, the abatement fees, gives us more tools in terms of enforcement. So the administrative penalties, in a summary, administrative penalties basically is the first thing that we would go to towards enforcement. So if there's an offense under the bylaw, we would obviously investigate that. Once we determine, yes, this is a violation or an offense under the bylaw, then we would obviously issue an order to comply. If there's not a compliance, then we can issue an administrative penalty, which is basically a voluntary payment. What we've identified in the bylaw at this stage, and again, it's sort of a placeholder, is $500. So if that person were to come and pay $500, you're basically saying, yep, I committed the offense, I'm paying it, and there can be no further action from the municipality in terms of moving towards a conviction under the PAPA, basically going to provincial court and getting a conviction, and then obviously a fine from the provincial court. Once they paid that, it's basically the item is considered closed, and we move forward. The nuisance and abatement fee is put in place for the situation where you get repetitive calls to the same property. So at some point in time, once you have an issue and you're continuing to return to an issue, your first goal or approach, as I mentioned, is educating. If you've moved past that and now there is failure to comply, then what this does is it actually levies, and again, we've identified $500. So basically, every time we get a request to deal with a nuisance or a noise issue, every time we go there, if we attend that property more than 3 times in 1 year, what it does then is it actually triggers the ability to administer the nuisance abatement fee. So if you go to a property more than 3 times in 1 year, and now this is your 4th time, that actually allows us to levy a $500 fee in addition to the administrative penalty. So every time a bylaw enforcement officer has to go to that property, it's 500, 500, 500, which can be levied against the property owner. If there is no payment of an administrative penalty, and obviously this is a continuing ongoing issue and we're continuing to return to the property, then we move to actual enforcement in terms of conviction under PAPA, which we were suggesting, which in the bylaw is stated that the minimum fine is $1,500 up to a maximum of $2,100. That's according to the category, I believe, C or D, in terms of the PAPA regulations from the province. So having these tools in terms of administrative penalties, abatement fees, and then obviously convictions gives us more tools to be able, in terms of enforcement, through the process. I'll leave it there as a summary, and again, if there's any questions, I'm open to those. Thank you, Your Worship.
Great, thank you, Mr. Colburn, and thank you, Ms. Jarvis, for popping in and for the work that you've done on this file. And, you know, as with so many things, sometimes when change is needed, it's complaint-driven. And so we do respect and give gratitude to our residents who, you know, patiently await change to happen. And from what I've read and from what I've seen in this new proposal, the nuisance was missing as far as having teeth in it, and this puts teeth into moving forward with our community, and hopefully will bring some peace to neighbors who are affected negatively by by others. So I'm going to go to Councillor Bigger, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for all the work getting this drafted up, and it's probably long overdue in terms of the length of time it's been since it was first introduced. I have a couple of questions. One is about Ms. Jarvis's staff report, and the second bullet of that staff report that says that in 2024, 8 complaints were for one specific address and associated with a religious or secular use. Well, I don't think there's anything else except religious or secular. They're the yin and yang, one of the other. So are we saying, I just want to make sure I understand, so that 8 complaints were for one address, but for both activities that some of which might be considered religious and some of what might not be? Is that, am I reading that right? Okay, but it's the same place nevertheless for those. Okay, okay, thanks. Let me shift gears. There's lots about consumer fireworks in this bylaw, and it's a bit of a twofer almost in that way. And I support trying to hone in on regulations related to, you know, use of consumer fireworks in our town. It's certainly been a hot topic. See what I did there? And I wonder, does this mean that would adoption of this mean that we no longer have to consider adding consumer fireworks in our town on the 2026 ballot? And that might be a question for council, or perhaps that's a question that nobody can answer right off. But it seems to be a fairly exhaustive, you know, application of rules around the use of consumer fireworks, and so I just wondered about that. I don't know. I don't know if you can speak to that or not, Mr. Colburn, but.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Bigger. So we did have conversations around this, my team and with our solicitor, and what we've done is basically, as I mentioned, we've taken with the existing provisions, nothing has changed, and the reason we took that approach was specifically for that reason. So because we are taking what currently exists, moving it into this new bylaw, the same questions, the same actions that have happened are still there. You're still trying to answer that same question. So from our understanding and in conversations with our solicitor, it doesn't change that perspective. You still have the ability to come back based on that decision and make amendments to this or strike it accordingly, or remove it and create its own bylaw. So we haven't, for that particular reason, we did not change any of the language around that.
Okay.
Recognizing that.
And I guess where council has passed a motion up previously to place it on the ballot, that's where we stand currently on that, is that that's where it's going to go.
That's correct. We have a motion to move forward with that, and unless
Right. council
decides to change that motion, then it's as is.
Well, you got to stay tuned on that one. I kind of think that the administrative and abatement penalties at 500 are too high. I take your point that they were just sort of a suggested amount, just to put something in there for the time being. But I'll just say that to me, if it's a question of a first offense or something that pinches a little, or that I think underlines it gives a little bit of muscle to what we're trying to do here, I certainly endorse that. But I'll just throw my vote out there that I believe that might be a little bit too high. And I guess I wanted to know how the fees are collected, and what we do in the case of someone who just, you know, thumbs their nose at our efforts to try to maintain sort of a peaceful neighborhood, you know.
Through your worship, so the bylaw, it states how the fees are paid, so they would pay the administrative penalty at the town hall, essentially.
Right, but what I'm asking is, what if they don't want to do that? What if they refuse to do that?
So if they refuse to do that, then we continue to work through the legal process.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we go to provincial court, and we would then obviously go through a conviction through that process, which would get into the penalties in accordance with PAPA, with that minimum of $1,500.
Yeah. So it's not something obviously where, you know, like with an unsightly premises situation, we can, you know, have that added to a tax lien by the province by virtue of getting reimbursed for, you know, et cetera, when we call them in to do a cleanup or what have you. It's just a completely different animal in that regard.
It's my understanding through your worship that if there's abatement fees and that's part of the bylaw and they failed to be paid, that would be, there is the avenue that could be tacked on to the actual fee from the provincial court.
The last thing I just want to ask, because you guys are sort of the experts on this, and I know you've given it a lot of reflection, a lot of thought, and I'm sure that, you know, everyone is trying to find the balance, you know, between people having the freedom to do the things that they love in the town they want to be in and being considerate of the people around them, of course. But I'm just compelled to ask if you have had any conversations around the likelihood of people of, you mentioned, you know, lumping in sort of outdoor activities and religious activities in with the same exemptions sort of model for parades and festivals. And logically, I see that in terms of if you're having a big church barbecue with bouncy house and, I don't know, you bring in a pony or something, whatever, and there's music playing and whatnot, well, that probably has the same capacity to impose on the peace and quiet of the neighborhood for a fair distance, you know, depending on how kind of grandiose your activity is. What's been the discussion around somebody saying, "Oh, wait, this is religious persecution. You're abating us from doing what we want to do as based on our faith." Has there been any consideration along that line?
Through your worship, so we've had those discussions, and so the approach that's been presented in the bylaw is obviously we recognize that when those activities are occurring inside the building, they're inside the building. So once you take them outside of that building, and it's building on what actually is in the zoning bylaw with respect to business activities outside of the business that's currently in our zoning bylaw as well. It requires approvals. But we didn't say focus specifically on religious sort of activities or institutions. It incorporates organized events, you know, parades and those types of things. So what the intent is to communicate. And a lot of times it's simple communication, letting the people around you, the residents around you that know that, okay, we're having this event. It's a one-day event. It's going to run from 10 to 3. We're packing up and then it's all done. So it's not going to be a reoccurrence every Saturday for the entire summer. And maybe that is the ask, but that would be a decision of council. And then you would present that to the community accordingly, right? And you would get feedback. And maybe some people can say, you know what, yep, I recognize they're having their event and I'm going to leave the town or leave the neighborhood for that particular hours and go do something else, and then I'll come back and everything's okay. A lot of these things in terms of bylaws and the things we address, a lot of it is communication as well as education sort of things. So that's sort of always our first approach is communicate, educate, and then if you become knowledgeable and you continue to break the rules, okay, then there's other things we need to look at. Essentially.
Well, and that leads to, I know I've had about 5 bites at the apple here, but the very last thing I was going to ask is what's the strategy to convey all of this to interested parties, for example? So if you are this one location that had 8 complaints in 2024, what's the proactive approach to convey to them what the updated bylaw stipulates regarding, you know, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we will, through you, your worship, to Councillor Bigger and to council, we will be undertaking obviously an effective communication in terms of this new bylaw. It doesn't require a public hearing. It's under the Local Governance Act, which basically means that you can get first and second reading. Then it has to be posted for a minimum of 14 days on our website. We can communicate the fact that it is on the website through social media. We will also reach out. We'll go back, step back, and say, okay, you know, what are sort of some of the bigger impacts here? So we wouldn't mind, you know, reaching out to some of the churches, some of those organizations saying, hey, there's a new bylaw, it's on the website, please have a look, and we're open to hearing your feedback. So
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Scryer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Colburn and Jennifer Jarvis, for all your work on this file. I have a couple of things. First, I want to ask a question, and then a couple of statements. What is considered a festive, I understand, it could be Christmas or a St. Patty's parade or something like that. What is considered traditional? when it says festive, traditional, and religious.
So it may, through you, Your Worship, our interpretation of that is something that may be related to a specific culture, because we have different cultures, different, through people moving to the,
Like Chinese New Year's or something like that?
so it's specifically to that tradition or that
Okay,
culture.
okay. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that, or what that was. So a few comments I have is I'm wanting everybody to enjoy their quality of life here in Quispamsis. And it's sort of sad that we have to come down with a hammer on, you know, if you want to have an event. Last summer I had a wedding, you know, outside. And so I guess now we would have to apply to have that wedding outside. And maybe, you know, the town has festivals here at the, how does that work? Does the town not have to abide by the noise bylaw, or do we have to, who do we apply for? I guess we get an exemption. You have a wedding at Means Cove Beach House. Do they have to apply for a noise exemption as well? So those are just things that are just running through my mind, and, you know, as it seems a shame, like I said, that we have to come to this point, and I know it's based on complaints, and so I don't want to quash that spirit that we have here to be able to enjoy our lifestyle. But I do understand that at certain times there's a nuisance, and that it is not fair to people. And the other area that I'm concerned about, two areas, is I think the fine is too high at $500. I think if we're just easing this in, like, I'd go, wow, I didn't know, I'm sorry, $500, and I'm just getting married. There goes all my envelopes to pay for the fine. The next is, I'm not convinced that we need a subcommittee, that can't be handled by staff. If a request comes in for, you know, they want to have something, staff know the bylaw inside out. I don't know why staff couldn't deal with it and say, yes, yeah, here's your permission to have that event. Now I know it's an extra thing on staff, but we're not sure how many questions or how many applications we're going to get in the first year. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's insignificant, but if all of a sudden it's huge, maybe then we could move to say, okay, maybe we should develop this subcommittee because it's getting too much for staff to handle. So those are my observations on the bylaw as it exists. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may, just one quick, so I appreciate the feedback, and those are the comments that we're looking for. Those are the things that's going to help us and guide us. Obviously, we look at it from here and then, you know, separate eyes in different perspectives. Just a comment in terms of if you're using town facilities, obviously there's a rental, there's a fee that has to be paid with that. So some of that may actually be, we could incorporate some of those things into the conditions and use of the facilities. So you're recognizing that you're using a town facility, you're paying for it. So those are other things that we would consider through this process, and I appreciate the feedback for sure. Thank you.
Just another point before I go to Councillor Locke, but you know, if it did go to court, if something did go to court, and if an officer had to accompany that person to court, that's a huge financial hit on the police department. So I don't look at $500 as being excessive. I look at it as being maybe punitive, so that poor behavior isn't repeated and that you follow the proper channels. Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to Mr. Colburn and his team. I know it's not easy to draft a bylaw like this. I was really happy to hear that we already talked a little bit about that balance, because I think that's the challenge, is finding a balance between residents being able to enjoy their property as in both regards, either doing something that creates a bit of noise but also not bothering your neighbors. So I'm happy to see the public nuisance. I mean, I guess I'll give you a few of my concerns. I see exceptions, and for example, one of the exceptions when I was reading through it was, it appears that I could hire someone to work on my property to make noise from 7 to 9, but as a personal property owner, I couldn't make noise until 8 to 9. So it just seems a little kind of counterintuitive, because if you're a business, you can make noise. Anyway, so I just thought I'd point that out in terms of the timing, but because, I mean, when you think about someone building a home, usually they start before 8. So I'm not sure if we want to look at that just to make sure there was consistency across the time. And then in terms of the public nuisance, I guess when I looked at it, I really looked at it a lens of, kind of utility in terms of how is this going to be actually kind of rolled out. So I know there's lots of exemptions, but what happens in the situation, and maybe you can kind of walk me through this scenario using this bylaw. So kids are playing loudly, or someone's having a birthday party in their backyard, or someone's having a pool party and they have a neighbor that doesn't like any noise. So again, I'm just wondering how, because that's not an exemption, but that's just people reasonably using their own property for enjoyment. And then another example would be like the police typically have barbecues. Well, now is that an event that they need to pay $300 to get an exemption to do a barbecue because it might create a bit more noise than normal? So I guess I feel like there's a lot of questions that I'd like to perhaps get clarity on. And then also in terms of cost, I agree. I feel like $500, but I guess this goes to my next question. It seems high for the first penalty. I definitely agree with the cumulative. So if you're a repeat offender, I definitely think that, the price should go up. But I guess in terms of the first situation, I guess depending on how it actually kind of flows in terms of the warning and how many warnings do you get, or if you say, okay, sorry, I didn't know, and you kind of try and rectify it, do you get a fine at all? So that would be my other question to you is, like, how many warnings do you get? And I couldn't really, and maybe it's here and I just didn't see it, kind of how that whole thing works. Like someone complains, it's investigated, and then do you say please stop and they stop, or okay, now that someone has complained, you're getting fined anyway? So I just wanted some clarity on that. Thanks.
Through you, Your Worship. So my response to that would be we would step back and if we step back and say, okay, how many complaints or what are the significant issues we get right now in Quispamsis as it relates to people who have, kids have birthday parties, or you have a gathering once a summer, you have all your friends and families over. Those are reasonable activities that one would anticipate is acceptable in terms of use of your property. In my 22 years, I don't remember having, a one-of in an event, a family, birthday party, those types of things that trigger, a big showing up, administrative penalties, taking these people to court. If it's the same property and there's a party every weekend for an entire summer, okay, the first complaint, we would say, okay, we would communicate and they would say, we just had a birthday party or such and such for our kid or a family, done. If that becomes a reoccurring item, then we would escalate the investigation, and that's what we would start communicating, saying, okay, you're causing concerns, we're getting concerns from your neighbors, what is your approach to address this? So we would get into that communicating, working with them to bring in compliance. If there's obviously, a little thumb to the nose, then obviously we would say, okay, then we're going to do an administrative penalty and take it through that process. So there's a reasonableness as well from an enforcement issue that we would look at that. In terms of like an example, the police event, again, a lot of that is communication. A lot of times if the town is aware of it, it's not so much applying for a permit or an exemption. If the town is aware, yep, the police are having a barbecue every Friday afternoon from 1 to 3, it's a fundraiser, somebody calls the town, we can easily say, this is what they're doing. And if they have a concern, maybe they're an adjacent property owner, well, can you, it's a bit noisy, sure, we would communicate them. So it's that communication, education, and we would go through those process. So there's a reasonableness in terms of our approach to enforcing this as well. So it's aimed towards those repeat offenders, those situations where you're trying to work with these property owners or the people that's causing the issues, and that, it's going to take a little more tools in the toolbox. That's sort of the intent of what we're bringing forward here.
I do have a follow-up for you. So in that regard, I guess in terms of applying for an exemption, I kind of feel like there's a lot of gray there. So I think, if we are going to ask people, because I believe I read that they have to pay for an exemption. Is that correct?
Yeah, because it involves the notice of the public and all those types of things.
So I guess based on your answer, I feel like that needs to be fleshed out a bit more, just in terms of then You know, again, like to your point, a lot of these things are just happening once a summer. So they don't count for needing an exemption, but then if they're doing it more than once a week, once a month. So I just think that that should be fleshed out a bit more just to make sure that it's very clear and the, you know, the bylaw works for everybody. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Luck. Councillor Thompson, please.
Oh, no, I didn't have.
Councillor Olson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Colburn and Ms. Jarvis for excellent work. I think the information contained in the revised bylaw just shows you that it needs to be looked at earlier than 25 years, because we're dealing with different issues that we never thought of maybe 25 years ago. And I think it's well done. We're not going to solve every issue written in paper, but there's going to be some digestion of the issue. And with this background information here, I'm sure that decisions can be arrived at fairly easily. But I think it's well done, and it covers a lot of new information, I think, and it should give everybody a little bit better comfort in how the town is taking a look at that responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Colburn.
If you don't mind, we'll just couple one or little things, and I'll. So next steps, again, to receive feedback. I appreciate the feedback that I heard this evening. Again, to continue to build on, we'll go back and look at those types of things. So in terms of moving forward, again, as I mentioned, there's no public hearing. It gets posted on the website, 14 days. It is available for review here at the town hall as well, and it can be made available. I will communicate with our clerk and our TIPA to see if we could actually post it maybe through Laserfiche as draft, so they can download it from there rather than having to come to the town hall. And then we move from there. Last item is, you will probably get tired of seeing me this year with bylaws, from what I hear. As we work through this process, there is always opportunities to make things better, more efficient. As we move through this process, myself, my team are open to feedback in terms of how we present these, how would it make more efficient. Please feel free to share those things with us, so we make this as simple, straightforward, easy as possible. My last closing statements.
Your Worship, just on the steps going forward, so just so I'm clear, this draft will not be on for the public hearing. After this conversation, this draft will be changed again before it goes to a public hearing?
We'll take back what we've heard this evening, have a review, see if we can tweak it a little, but we will make it available. So we'll bring it back to council, and then we will set it towards being on the website. Yeah. So we'll be moving it from committee to whole to regular session of council, and we'll start moving through that adoption process. Thank you, Your Worship.
Again, thank you, Mr. Colburn, and, regarding the 25 years between shoring up and changing some of the bylaws, as we always say, when we know better, we do better, and that's our motto. That's what we're trying to do. Item number B is proposed code of conduct bylaw. No, that's been removed. If you just pull down, Carrie, on the left-hand side. No, it's not a zone. Proposed code of conduct bylaw number 068, review and discussion. And we have about 15 minutes, but we can always come back. Mr. Watson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, before you this evening is an updated copy as requested, just to show all of the changes that we had proposed to the Code of Conduct. And again, just if I could take a second to expand upon the theme that was kind of percolating there a minute ago. This absolutely falls into the theme of stabilize, protect, and prepare that we've spoken about a couple of times. So this is chapter 2, I guess, of the stabilize section with respect to bylaws. To Mr. Colburn's earlier point, you're gonna see lots of bylaws over the next little while, but, and we certainly welcome thoughts from you in terms of process. But again, circle back and to zoom in on this one, changes were made, and in broad strokes, they were made to reflect changes in the Local Governance Act, and there's a section there. And then there's additional changes made, particularly with respect to investigations of complaints, and to ensure both procedural fairness and transparency in the process. So with that, certainly welcome any further discussion, and again, in the context of finalizing language, after which it would come before an open session of council in much the same way as the previous discussion.
Councillor Luck, please. Deputy Mayor Squire, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first, I was going to suggest that, I hope, suggest that council not do first and second reading tonight, that we leave that to the next meeting so that we can have discussion tonight as Councillor Luck's term to flush out some things that need to be taken care of, and then we can do on our next council meeting, we can do a first and second. On that, I do have a few questions, and it's starting with the very start of it under local government. We put, the title is cited as Council Code of Conduct, and everywhere else, the word council has been struck out for the word member. So I'm just wondering if that's what it should read, if it should be titled as the Members Code of Conduct. That was one question I had. The next one I had was on confidential information is deemed confidential and shall not directly or indirectly make public. That was number F. Sorry, I'll catch up with myself. I'm on the draft copy. I'm on F.
Which F?
3F on page.
Oh, 3F, okay. Yep. Nope. As long as I know which F.
Catching up with you. I want to find it too because I want to make sure I have it right. 3F.
Confidential information.
Yeah, should that wording shall not be directly or indirectly made public. How can you indirectly? You either say it or you don't say it. Like indirectly, I just thought that word was a little off. Like it's subject to what you say. Well, I'm not sure that word fits. So if staff would just take a look at that word. And then I went to number 4.2. It's formal complaint. 5 days of receipt to the members shall then be read in committee of the whole. So a formal complaint, so the member would receive the complaint within 5 days, but committee of the whole may not be immediate. It might be 2 weeks out. Is that what I'm reading right?
Mr. Watson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, maybe just I'll start at the Deputy Mayor's first and walk through, and we can touch on this one because I welcome the feedback, as Mr. Colburn did for our previous discussion. This is exploration of language to make sure that it works for you. With respect to the change in terminology from councillor to member, it's my understanding that the intent there is just to ensure that the interpretation is inclusive of the mayor. So that when we say member, we're saying all members of council and the mayor. Might need to think about whether or not a change in the title of the bylaw is appropriately changed to members code of conduct or not. But that's the rationale for the terminology is just that. I agree it's a little hard to indirectly release information publicly, although one can envision making something subtly available versus posting it explicitly on a personal webpage or website or other kind of forward pushing information. But I can certainly take that back and check with our solicitor with respect to the rationale for including that particular language. And again, we can also check with the Local Governance Act to make sure that there isn't language there that we need to respect. And your last on the timing there of complaints. The intent here is to ensure that there's a time, that the lodging of a complaint is time-bound, so that it must be made within 30 days after the alleged violation occurred. And that after having received a complaint within that 30 days, that the affected member is advised within 5 days.
Okay, Your Worship, I had two more, just regarding, depending on the nature of the complaint filed outside of a timeline. So if the complaint is filed outside of the 30 days, does it then go to the member, or is it just disposed of? And my last question is, corrective action shall not be imposed for a period longer than the period under the local governance. And I wanted to know what the local governance length of period is, length of time, the maximum length of time. I don't know what that is. Thank you.
Mr. Watson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, you're correct, Deputy Mayor, in that the intent of the language is for complaints that are lodged after the time limit of 30 days, that they're dismissed as outside the time frame. But the reason for the dismissal would be provided to the, well, actually, that's a good point. Maybe there's needs for some clarity there. I appreciate that. Because if the complaint is received after 30 days, I would suggest that it's automatically dismissed and there's no correspondence required because there's no consideration of the complaint. But we can take that back for sure to be sure that that is reflective of your interest there. With respect to the Local Governance Act, I believe the regulation was included in your package, and I'd need to refer back to that as well, just to be sure of the schedule of maximum penalties.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it. I'm sorry, I didn't see it in the package. That was, okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Your Worship.
You're welcome. It is 5:47. We can continue for another 2 minutes. 8? We're good? All right. Councillor Bigger, please. So just to keep your question so that we can get back to.
What's our time?
We have 8 minutes. You have
8 minutes.
3.5.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Your Worship. On Section 3G, conflict of interest, my question, I guess, is to our CAO. And if you flow down to page 6, under the section V, prohibited conflict, it says, point 1, a member shall not, and the point 2 there doesn't quite make sense to me, the language of it. It begins with lowercase or his or her personal gain, comma. And that just seems like some sort of a typo to me or something. It doesn't flow, in my opinion, from the previous point.
Mr. Watson's going to address that, Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I can help you out there, Councillor. I think you're right. I think it is a typo. It should,
Okay.
the
Just a
first word
mistake.
should be for. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you for the
okay.
catch. It's an important catch.
No problem. The other thing I wanted to ask about was the 30-day time frame on receiving complaints. I can imagine situations where a complaint could be generated after a 30-day period or something comes to light. And I don't want to needlessly widen the process, but I just wonder if that can be defended logically, the idea that no complaint would be, that any complaint inside of 30 days would have merit and get sober review, but after 30 days, too bad. It strikes me, then again, I don't know where else you'd draw the line with that, so I offer that up for your consideration.
Thank you, Councillor, and Your Worship, through you. I agree, and that's the kind of feedback that's super helpful here. So if council is uncomfortable with 30 days and wish to amend it, hey, we're all ears to that. The only caveat to that, I just want to make sure that we're, again, staying in line with the Local Governance Act and any particular expectations that may exist therein. We'd be happy to take the advice and check the act.
Thank you. Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one thing, 4.2D, I'm just trying to find it here. I just had a question. It says, complaint received after the end of the nomination period. And I'm just wondering the rationale of the end versus the beginning, because we're not talking a whole lot of time, but would you even have time to address it if it came in kind of during or at the beginning of the nomination period versus the end? So I just didn't know if that should be kind of looked at again.
Mr. Watson, thank you. Councillor? Yeah, just one second.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that feedback very much, Councillor. And to my mind, there's flexibility on our end on that language. So if it's Council's wish, we can certainly make the change. Noting that was the language in the previous, but appreciate we're taking a look at the whole thing here. So welcome any feedback about red or black print. So certainly take that back with thanks.
Okay, and I guess my other question is in regards to 4.12. And I guess I'm going to preface it. Going through this, I went back and as I do, I looked at the literature. So when I looked at some of the research on workplace dynamics and communication, as well as theory and organizational behavior in regards to communication and resolving conflicts, when individuals bypass colleagues, what the research is suggesting is that a lot of things can happen. So, there's not an opportunity for, direct resolution, power dynamics, workplace culture, morale, losing the opportunity to set expectations on communications, the impact on team dynamics. And I'm just wondering, when I've looked at other codes of conduct, they've used wording like request the mayor to assist in moderating a discussion with the complainant and the member. And I just wonder if that would be, because really the intent is ideally, I think that, there should be a culture where if something happens, the first step, ideally, within life, you'd want to directly address it with the person if you have an issue. I think that for workplace culture would be the ideal. But then if the person isn't comfortable and they don't feel that they want to make a formal complaint, I'm just wondering if it would be better worded that the mayor assist in moderating the discussion versus having kind of an informal discussion on the side. And then that way it includes both the complainant as well as the member that is being complained about.
Thank you. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Yeah, and we're on 4.1A, sub-bullet 2.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Councillor. And yeah, I can see how a modest change to the language there. It certainly, what you're describing to me reflects the intent. So if adjusting the language a bit is more reflective of that intent, I'm happy to make that suggestion. So between the clerk and I, we can come up with some lingo there. Thank you. And with your assistance, we can check in with you.
Thank you. And I think the other thing that you might want to include in that would be progressive observances. So if there is more than one concern that has already been discussed or a second concern that's been discussed, then at some point corrective action has to be taken. So I think it's very important to make sure that there's the inclusion of the word progressive action in this. Deputy Mayor Scryer.
Thank you, Worship. I'll be quick. It's just something that's been weighing on me, and it's when we're looking at conflict of interest, it's very clear. Financial conflicts are very clear to me for a member, but when you get into more subjective issues, he said, she said, it gets a little bit more gray. But what I always wonder about is the right of the counselor or the member, the right to be able to, if something is financial, like I said, I think it's very clear cut, but there could be other issues that a counselor needs to address with staff, or for instance, they may be going for a variance, and what's their role there? Like, how do they step back from that when it involves themselves personally? They may be looking at, I don't know, buying a piece of land. And they have questions as to that piece of land and what's the role there for, and I don't want to debate it, I just want us to think about that. Like, you think about it more as outside of financial risk. This is more of a, you know, it has to be two-sided, like the code of conflict or code conduct cannot just be this you have to do. Well, you're still a person and you still have rights. And I want to make sure that they're not trampled upon or not taken away within a code of conduct. Thank you.
Thank you, and we have to move forward. Mr. Watson.
So thank you very much, Your Worship, and to councillors who have offered thoughts and comments here. Suggest that the window for thoughts and comments remains open, so if they want to flow in my direction or to the clerk, or both, certainly welcome that over the next little while, and then we can come back to next committee of the whole for to finish up the discussion, and if you're comfortable at that time, we could move to first and second reading.
Forward, looking for an adjournment, please. Moved by Councillor Olson. Do we need a motion to bring this back?
We didn't last time, we did. Motion to go back for more discussion? I don't think so.
I mean, I have it in the minutes, so we don't need a formal resolution for
Okay,
committee.
okay. All right.
Just,
Please,
voting on-
please vote now for adjournment. No is yes. Sorry. 2 minutes? Did you vote, Carrie?
Yeah,
Okay.
Carrie's deputy mayor.
Correct.
That's correct. You're correct.
I vote yes, adjournment.
What's the-
Okay.
Motion carried. Okay, we have about 3 minutes for a bio break.